The problem with space funerals, Captain Vyerk had always thought, was that they were far too literal. You'd think chucking a body into the endless void would be the same kind of universally accepted gesture everywhere. But no, apparently some species just have to overthink it. Currently, Vyerk was standing on the bridge of the Last Hope, a name he found increasingly ironic, given that they were a part of a refugee fleet that had seen more disasters than victories lately. "All right, folks," Vyerk said, adjusting his command hat, "another relic of a past life. Time to send Manny off in style. Try not to trip over your own feet, and for the love of all things holy, don't touch anything that looks important." The crew, a ragtag bunch of misfits and the universe's least likely to succeed candidates, bustled around the bridge, preparing for yet another farewell. Vyerk liked to think they were getting better at this, but that was just to make himself feel better. "Captain, are we really gonna do this every time someone bites it?" grumbled Jorvin, a tall, lanky engineer whose perpetual scowl could curdle milk. "Jorvin, you heartless bastard," chuckled Vyerk. "Of course we are. It's tradition. And besides, Manny owed me 50 credits, so this is my last chance to make him feel bad about it." The crew gathered solemnly, though you could tell that solemn was about as natural to them as wings on a fish. Vyerk raised a hand, and with the kind of flourish only an aspiring thespian could muster, began the ceremony. "We gather here today," he started, "to mourn the passing of Manny, who was, as we all know, a complete idiot." "Hear, hear," someone muttered to half-hearted chuckles. "He never met a problem he couldn't make worse, never saw a safety measure he couldn't ignore," continued Vyerk. "But damn if he didn't try his best." As the capsule containing Manny's body was prepared for launch, the mood on the bridge shifted. Even Jorvin looked a bit less like he'd swallowed a lemon. But before the capsule could be launched, alarms blared through the ship like a banshee on a caffeine high. "Captain, incoming fleet!" yelled Sierra, the ship's communications officer, who always had a knack for stating the obvious at the worst possible times. "Of course there is," Vyerk sighed, rolling his eyes. "What's their problem?" "They think we're declaring war," Sierra replied, tapping at the console as if hoping it would suddenly reverse its course. "War? Over a funeral? Who the hell are these delicate little flowers?" "The Zorglaxians, sir." "Ah," Vyerk said, nodding sagely, "the Zorglaxians. Famous for their inability to mind their own business and their penchant for overreacting." "What do we do, Captain?" Jorvin asked, clearly not thrilled at the prospect of fighting over a misunderstanding. "Well, we can't exactly send them a fruit basket," Vyerk said dryly. "Let's try not to die while I think of something." As the alien ship surrounded them, their engines humming with the kind of energy that usually meant a bad day, Vyerk decided to stall for time. "Open a channel," he commanded. Sierra did so, and Vyerk leaned into the mic with the kind of gravitas only a man truly out of his depth could muster. "This is Captain Vyerk of the Last Hope," he said. "We're not declaring war, you idiots. We're just trying to send Manny off to the great beyond without incident." The Zorglaxian response was less than ideal. Their intent, apparently, was to trap the refugee fleet in some kind of Dreamscape battlefield. Typical Zorglaxian overkill. "Captain," piped up Ree, the ship's navigator, "they're initiating some kind of advanced Dreamscape lockdown." "We're not going anywhere." "Well, isn't that just the cherry on our shit sundae?" Vyerk grumbled. "All right, people, looks like we're stuck here for the time being." "You mean we're in a dreamscape?" Jorvin asked, scratching his head as if trying to dig out an answer. "Yep," Vyerk said with a shrug. "A whole mess of existential nonsense designed to keep us in place until they can figure out if we're a threat." "What's the plan?" Sierra asked, all eyes turning to Vyerk. "Plan? Since when do we have a plan?" Vyerk shot back, but seeing the panicked looks around him, he relented. "Okay, fine. We'll figure out a way to break their dreamscape. If the Zorglaxians want a war of perception, we'll give them one hell of a fight." "And how do we do that?" questioned Jorvin. "Simple," Vyerk replied, drumming his fingers on the console. "We'll confuse them, stir things up, Make them question their reality like a college student who just discovered philosophy. And if that doesn't work, Ree asked. Then we'll improvise, Vayek declared, which was his way of saying, we're screwed, but with a bit more flair. As the crew set to work trying to think of ways to outsmart their captors, Vayek couldn't help but chuckle to himself. Here he was, a captain of a ship named Last Hope, preparing his crew to fight an alien force that took a funeral as a threat. What a fine mess we've gotten ourselves into, he muttered under his breath, watching the stars drift by outside. Just another day at the office. It wasn't long before the dreamscape began to take shape, a swirling vortex of colors and sensations that was just pretentious enough to make Vayek roll his eyes. Well, this is cozy, Jorvin said, staring at the dreamscape as if it personally offended him. I've seen worse, Vayek replied, though he was hard-pressed to remember when. The crew prepared themselves as best they could, awkwardly checking weapons and systems as the dreamscape tightened its grip. Vayek knew that the only way out was through, and that meant getting creative. Okay, folks, he said, his voice calm and collected. Let's make them regret ever picking a fight with the least organized bunch of humans in the galaxy. With that, the crew plunged into the dreamscape, each step forward feeling like moving through thick syrup. Vayek led the way, throwing out snarky comments and sarcastic quips like confetti at a bad parade. Keep close, he shouted back to his crew. Don't let this nonsense mess with your heads. The dreamscape was a bizarre parody of reality, a place where logic seemed to take a holiday. Yet the crew soldiered on, their spirits somehow buoyed by the ridiculousness of it all. Captain, Ree called from behind, I think I found something. Vayek turned, pushing through the surreal mess that was the dreamscape. Ree stood next to what appeared to be a control node, the kind of thing you only saw in science fiction movies. Well, isn't that convenient, Vayek said with a smirk. Any ideas? We can possibly disrupt the dreamscape, Ree suggested. Make it unstable enough to break free. Do it, Vayek ordered, figuring it was their best shot. As Ree worked, the dreamscape began to tremble, ripples of chaos spreading through its bizarre landscape. It seemed Vayek's plan of confusion was bearing fruit. Hold on, everyone, Ree warned. This could get bumpy. With a final tap on the control node, the dreamscape began to unravel, and Vayek felt a surge of triumph despite himself. Looks like we're getting out of this mess, he shouted, grinning at the wild ride. The crew clung to whatever they could, riding the madness like a roller coaster gone haywire. As the dreamscape shattered around them, the last hope surged free, the stars suddenly coming back into focus like an old friend. The Zorglaxian ships hovered at a distance, apparently not expecting their little trap to fail so spectacularly. Captain, we're clear, Sierra reported, a note of disbelief in her voice. Good, Vayek said, settling back into his chair with a satisfied sigh. Now, let's get the hell out of here before they decide to try something else. The last hope powered up its engines, the crew moving with the kind of efficiency that came only from sheer relief. As they prepared to leave, Vayek couldn't help but address the Zorglaxians one last time. Next time, he said, flipping the comms on, try sending a fruit basket instead of a dreamscape. It's a lot less hassle for everyone. With that, the last hope darted away, leaving the Zorglaxians to ponder their next move. Vayek leaned back, closing his eyes and enjoying the momentary peace. Just another day in paradise, he murmured to himself, knowing full well that paradise was a concept as foreign as understanding alien funeral customs. As the stars stretched out before them, Vayek couldn't help but smile. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, and probably with a sarcastic comment or two. Captain Vayek sat in his chair, scratching at the stubble on his chin with the kind of distracted irritation usually reserved for accountants faced with tax season. The last hope continued its merry escape through space, a floating monument to the universe's cruel sense of humor. So, Jorvin drawled, leaning against the console like a man who'd long since given up on the universe. What do we do now, Captain? Send another message asking if they'd like to join us for tea and biscuits. If only sarcasm could power our engines, Jorvin, Vyark replied. We'd have enough fuel to go anywhere but here. You think they'll just let us go? Asked Sierra, perched like a hawk over her communications array, fingers poised for the next inevitable disaster. Let us go, these Zorglaxians. The same fools who think funerals are declarations of war, Vyark scoffed. Might as well expect a black hole to cough up a rainbow. Ree glanced up from her station, her face a mask of forced calm. I think the Zorglaxians are trying to communicate again. Well, that's fantastic, Vyark said with a sigh. I'm sure this will clear everything up. The screen flickered to life, revealing a Zorglaxian commander. His scales shimmered like bad wallpaper in a cheap motel. Humans, he hissed, his voice a blend of contempt and migraine-inducing shrillness. You have dared to enter our sacred dreamscape. Ah, yes, the sacred dreamscape, Vyark said, feigning understanding. Aren't we the lucky tourists? We demand recompense for this violation, the Zorglaxian continued, his eyes narrowing with the kind of menace only an alien bureaucrat could muster. Recompense? You want us to sing you a song or maybe a nice card, Vyark retorted. Because that's all we've got left to offer, Jorvin snorted. Maybe they'd like a refund on the ticket they didn't buy. Silence, the Zorglaxian barked, his voice grating enough to make Vyark wince. You will remain within our dreamscape until we decide your fate. Vyark leaned closer to the mic, as if imparting a secret to an old friend. You know, this whole dreamscape thing isn't really working out for us. Mind if we just slide on by and call it even? The commander's scales flushed a deeper shade of hostility. You mock us, human. Only with every fiber of my being, Vyark replied, grinning like a man who just found out his mother-in-law had moved to another planet. With a final glare, the screen went dark, leaving the crew to sit in the dim glow of the bridge. Well, that went swimmingly, Jorvin said, rolling his eyes. Like a fish in a blender, Vyark agreed. We need a new plan, something smart, something unpredictable. Sierra leaned back, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. What if we use this dreamscape to our advantage? Oh, you mean the thing that's designed to keep us as confused as a cat in a dog show? Vyark asked. Exactly, Sierra nodded. We could manipulate it to our terms, cause some chaos. Vyark considered this, tapping his fingers against the armrest. Chaos. Now that's a language I'm fluent in. Sure, but how? Jorvin cut in, skepticism dripping from his words like grease off a burger. We can't exactly reboot reality. No, but we can stir the pot, Vyark replied. If we can make the Zorglaxians question their own reality, we might just get them to back off. And how do we do that? Ree asked. Start acting like we're more insane than they are. Precisely, Vyark grinned. Let's give them a taste of human absurdity. Make them think twice about keeping us here. The crew set to work, each member embracing their inner lunatic with an enthusiasm that was equal parts alarming and impressive. Jorvin, ever the practical one, began by routing ship noises through the communication system, creating an eerie symphony of clanks and groans. Sierra crafted a script of nonsensical transmissions, a bizarre blend of human idioms and complete gibberish. What's the Zorglaxian word for banana hammock? She muttered to herself, typing furiously. Ree, for her part, tinkered with the dreamscape controls. What if we can disrupt their visual feeds? She suggested. Make them see things that aren't there. Like what? Vyark asked, genuinely curious. How about a giant rubber duck? Ree said with a shrug. Always worked for my stressed dreams, Jorvin snorted. A rubber duck that'll really have them quaking in their boots. More like quacking, Sierra quipped, earning groans from everyone. Vyark rubbed his temples, fighting back a grin. Let's do it. Let's make them question their sanity one quack at a time. The ship hummed with activity, each crew member doing their part to bring Vyark's chaotic vision to life. The Zorglaxians, monitoring their dreamscape, began receiving transmissions that made as much sense as a fish riding a bicycle. This is the last hope. We demand 20 gallons of pudding and a map to the nearest hot dog stand, Sierra transmitted, her deadpan delivery adding an extra layer of absurdity. Meanwhile, Rhee's adjustments bore fruit as the Zorglaxian's view was suddenly filled with the image of an enormous, bobbing rubber duck, complete with a jaunty sailor's hat. "This better work," Jorvin grunted, shaking his head at the spectacle. "Or we're going to look like the galaxy's biggest idiots." "Relax," Vyerk said. "We already are. We're just owning it." As the confusion unfolded, the Zorglaxians scrambled to make sense of the bizarre data. Their command center was a flurry of activity, scales shimmering in panic as they tried to reconcile the reality they knew with the chaos unfolding before them. "Human vessel," a new Zorglaxian voice boomed over the comms, sounding more bewildered than angry. "What is the meaning of this madness?" Vyerk toggled the comms with a casual flick. "Oh, this, just a little human tradition we like to call total insanity, really brings people together. Your actions lack any logic," the alien insisted, his voice a mix of frustration and disbelief. "Welcome to the human experience," Vyerk replied. "We find it refreshing." Jorvin leaned over, whispering, "I think they're buying it." "Of course they are," Vyerk said confidently. "We're an enigma wrapped in a paradox, served with a side of lunacy." The Zorglaxians hesitated, their collective resolve shaken by the unexpected turn of events. Their advanced dreamscape had been reduced to a carnival of confusion, and Vyerk knew they were close to breaking. "You think they'll let us go?" Rhee asked, hope tinged with skepticism. "They might," Vyerk said, "if only to avoid dealing with us any longer." Sierra chuckled. "We're like that one relative you can't stand but have to invite to the family reunion." "Exactly," Vyerk agreed. "Now let's keep pushing until they decide to give us the boot." Back in the Dreamscape control center, Zorglaxian officers debated their next move, the image of the rubber duck still floating serenely on their screens. The humans had introduced an element they hadn't accounted for, pure, unadulterated absurdity. "Perhaps we misjudged their intentions," one officer suggested, his voice tentative. "Or they're just mad," another countered, eyeing the duck with suspicion. The commander, who'd initiated the Dreamscape standoff, rubbed his brow with one clawed hand. "Human madness is a formidable weapon," he admitted reluctantly. Back on the bridge of the Last Hope, the crew watched as the Zorglaxian ships began to pull away, their formation breaking apart like a poorly organized dance routine. "They're leaving," Sierra reported, disbelief coloring her words. "And they say madness never solved anything," Vyerk said, unable to suppress a grin. "Let's not look a gift horse in the mouth." Jorvin let out a low whistle. "Worked like a charm." "Never underestimate the power of the unexpected," Vyerk said. "Or, apparently, oversized bath toys." As the Zorglaxians retreated, the crew set about recalibrating their systems, the absurdity of the situation still hanging in the air like the last joke at a bad comedy show. "Captain," Rhee said, her voice a mix of relief and exhaustion, "we're clear to resume our course." "Good," Vyerk said, settling back into his chair with a satisfied sigh. "Let's get moving before anyone else decides to take issue with our life choices." As the Last Hope slipped back into the silent vacuum of space, the crew shared a collective sense of worn-out camaraderie, the kind that only comes from narrowly avoiding disaster with sheer audacity and a touch of madness. "We're going to need a new funeral plan," Sierra commented dryly as the reality of their original task settled back in. "Something less explosive," Jorvin added. "Preferably without intergalactic incidents," Rhee concluded. Vyerk chuckled. "I'll add it to the to-do list, right under Find Sanity." Despite the chaos, or perhaps because of it, there was a sense of accomplishment among them. They might have been a ragtag crew, but they'd faced down the universe's madness and come out the other side, if not intact, then at least in one piece. Another day, another bizarre interstellar incident, Vyerk muttered to himself, staring out into the void. Just another day in the office. And with that, the Last Hope continued on its journey, carrying its crew of misfits through the stars, ready for whatever insanity the universe decided to throw their way next. The Last Hope danced through the dreamscape like a drunk at a wedding, unpredictable and a little embarrassing, but hard to ignore. "Captain, we're getting some weird readings again," Sierra announced, her eyes glued to the screens. The Zorglaxians are throwing everything but the kitchen sink at us. Well, if they bring the sink, I hope it's stainless steel, Vire quipped. I've been meaning to do some remodeling. Jorvin leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. I think they've got us in a game of cosmic charades and we're losing. Badly. Vire shrugged. We might be losing, but at least we're losing with flair. Flair doesn't stop torpedoes, Ree pointed out, a touch too practically. True, but it does make for a hell of a funeral, Vayek replied, his grin as sharp as ever. The bridge shook as another wave of surreal energy from the Zorglaxians hit. The Dreamscape was a place where reality flexed like overcooked spaghetti, and right now it was serving the crew an unfamiliar dish of chaos. Captain, Lieutenant Kess is asking to come aboard for tactical briefing, Sierra announced, breaking the growing tension. Oh, lovely, another head to join the circus, Vayek muttered. Bring him in. Maybe he can juggle. Kess, the latest addition to their merry band of misfits, stormed onto the bridge with a face like thunderclouds. He was fresh from the academy, where they'd taught him everything except how to deal with the unpredictability of real space travel. Today, he was learning on the job, like a student pilot being handed the keys to a starfighter during a meteor shower. Captain, the Zorglaxians are ramping up. They're warping the Dreamscape faster than a teenager in a virtual reality marathon. We need to outmaneuver them, Kess said, eyes blazing with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for the deeply naive or the criminally insane. Outmaneuvering them is the plan, Vayek replied, but first we need to figure out what the hell they are doing. They're adapting, Kess continued, warming to his theme. We need to use creativity, exploit the Dreamscape's nature, turn their weapons back on them. Creativity? Jorvin asked, his eyebrow arching in a way that suggested skepticism had just been declared the new black. What are we supposed to do? Paint them a pretty picture. Not quite, Kess said, but we could make them see what isn't there. The Dreamscape responds to thought intention. We just need to will the impossible into existence. Sounds like you've been reading too many self-help books, Sierra commented dryly. Or inhaling toxic fumes, Jorvin added. Look, we don't have much to lose, Kess insisted. We've already thrown a rubber duck into the mix. Why not an entire carnival of chaos? Vayek leaned forward, eyes glinting with interest. Go on, Kess took a deep breath. We use the Dreamscape to project illusions, bait them into chasing shadows while we find a way out of this mess. Illusions, huh? Vayek mused. Never thought I'd be leading a crew of interstellar magicians. Ree looked around, a smile tugging at her lips. Guess that makes you the ringmaster, Captain. Great, Vayek said. I've always wanted to work with clowns. The crew got to work, each member channeling their inner Houdini to craft a tapestry of confusion. Within moments, the Dreamscape around the Last Hope was swirling with phantom fleets, ghostly asteroid fields and nebulae bright enough to lead the blind. Think this'll confuse them? Sierra asked, her fingers dancing across her console. At the very least, it'll give them a headache, Vayek replied. As if on cue, the comms crackled to life with the frustrated chatter of Zorglaxian operatives trying to make sense of the shifting battlefield. The humans had turned the tables, unleashing a barrage of absurdity so potent it had even the most stoic Zorglaxian questioning their grip on reality. Jorvin watched the chaos unfold on the monitor with a satisfied smirk. Looks like they're chasing their tails. More like chasing their tentacles, Ree said, studying the tangled mess of ships and illusions. Whatever they're chasing, it's not us, Vayek said, a note of triumph in his voice. Keep it up, folks. Kess, for his part, seemed to have found his footing, barking orders and making adjustments with a confidence that belied his lack of experience. Doubles down on the projections, he instructed. Make them think we're everywhere and nowhere. Like a bad rash, Jorvin added. Or a politician during election season, Sierra quipped. As the Dreamscape continued to warp under their control, the crew watched as the Zorglaxian ships tangled themselves in a web of human ingenuity and outright madness. It was a symphony of chaos, each note designed to keep the aliens on their toes. "They're scattering," Ree reported, a touch of awe in her voice. "We might actually be pulling this off." "Of course we are," Vayark said. "We're human. We specialize in making the impossible possible," with a side of sarcasm. The Zorglaxians, for all their technological superiority, had been caught off guard by the humans' unconventional tactics. As their carefully orchestrated dreamscape descended into a cacophony of nonsense, the once imposing fleet found itself floundering, unable to distinguish friend from foe. "We should send them a thank you card," Jorvin suggested, "for making it this easy. Maybe with a box of chocolates," Sierra added. "Or a rubber duck," Ree said, stifling a laugh. With the Zorglaxians in disarray, the last hope had a clear path through the chaos, and Vayark wasted no time in taking advantage of the opportunity. "Punch it," he ordered, his voice steady and composed. The ship surged forward, propelled by a mixture of adrenaline and sheer stubbornness. The crew watched as the Zorglaxians receded into the distance, their formation broken, their resolve shattered. "We did it," Kess said, disbelief lacing his words. "More like we survived it," Vayark corrected. "But I'll take it." The crew breathed a collective sigh of relief as the ship slipped out of the dreamscape, leaving behind the madness of their encounter with the Zorglaxians. "Let's hope we don't have to do that again anytime soon," Sierra said, her voice a mix of exhaustion and amusement. "We can add it to our list of party tricks," Jorvin replied. "As long as I get to retire before the next performance," Ree said. Kess, who had proven himself in the heat of battle, looked around the bridge with a newfound sense of belonging. "Thanks for trusting me, Captain." Vayark nodded, a rare moment of sincerity breaking through his usual sarcasm. "You did good, Lieutenant." "Welcome to the crew." With the Zorglaxians behind them and the path ahead clear, the last hope resumed its course through the vastness of space, the crew once again united by the strange bond that forms when you've stared absurdity in the face and laughed. "Hey, Captain," Jorvin called out. "Think the Zorglaxians will send us a bill for the damages?" "Let him try," Vayark replied, grinning. "We'll just pay them in chaos. Seems to be our currency of choice." The crew chuckled, the tension of their recent encounter melting away in the warmth of shared laughter. They might be a ragtag group, but they were survivors, and they'd proven that even in the darkest corners of the universe, human ingenuity and a touch of madness were more than enough to tip the scales. As the last hope sailed through the cosmos, the crew settled back into the rhythm of space travel, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. In a universe where reality was often stranger than fiction, they'd learned to adapt, to improvise, and most importantly, to never underestimate the power of a well-timed joke. "Another day, another interstellar incident narrowly avoided," Vayark said, more to himself than anyone else. "Just another day at the office," Sierra echoed, her voice laced with humor. And with that, the last hope continued its journey, carrying its crew of misfits through the stars, always ready for the next adventure, the next challenge, and the next opportunity to prove that when it came to surviving the universe's madness, there was no team better suited than them. Space was a lovely shade of existential dread today. The view outside the last hope was a symphony of chaos, pardon the cliché, more like a cacophony of cosmic existential crises bundled in surreal energy waves. The Zorglaxians, evidently not fans of their recent humiliation, were escalating their attacks with the desperation of a gambler down to his last credit. Captain Vayark lounged in his chair, watching the reality-bending spectacle with the nonchalance of a man who'd seen it all before and had just about enough of it. "You know," he mused, "if they keep this up, they'll turn the entire fleet into a Jackson Pollock painting, and not the good kind." Jorvin snorted, arms crossed as though he was trying to squeeze out whatever faith he had left in the universe. "At this rate, we're not going to be an avant-garde art piece, just space debris with an identity crisis." The bridge was a hive of activity, crew members scrambling like ants on a hot sidewalk. Sierra was glued to her screens, eyes darting like a caffeinated squirt. "Captain, resources are dwindling faster than my patience. We're burning through power reserves like a pyromaniac at a fire sale." "Charming," Vyerk said, running a hand through his hair. It was standing up in interesting directions, giving him the air of a mad scientist. "Jorvin, see what you can scrounge up. Maybe there's a power cell tucked away between the seat cushions." Kess, the eager fresh face with the enthusiasm of a puppy, piped up, "Or we could try siphoning energy from the Zorglaxian weapons." Vyerk raised a brow. "And risk giving them the universe's weirdest back massage if we screw it up." "No thanks, Lieutenant. I like my crew unelectrocuted." Ever the pragmatist, looked up from her calculations with a grimace. "We need options that don't involve turning us into a sizzling side dish." "Well," Vyerk replied, "if there's one thing we humans excel at, it's finding solutions in dark places, like a raccoon in a dumpster." The comms crackled as the Zorglaxian commander's voice cut through the static, dripping with contempt. "You persist in your futile resistance, humans. Surrender and we may yet spare your miserable existence." Vyerk couldn't resist. "Oh, spare us the lecture. We've heard better offers from used shuttle salesmen. Your impertinence will be your undoing." The commander spat back, his words brimming with alien arrogance. "Right," Vyerk drawled. "I'll pencil that in between brunch and our existential crisis." With the Zorglaxians occupying themselves with their melodramatic proclamations, the crew regrouped, gathering like survivors at a lifeboat drill. "Captain, restarted at this rate, we'll run out of supplies before we can make it out alive. Unless we figure out what the Zorglaxians are doing, our days are numbered." "Days?" Jorvin asked, tapping away at his console. "You're being optimistic. I'd give us Ior's tops." Sierra spun in her chair, eyes narrowing with determination. "Maybe we should return the favor, infiltrate the Dreamscape. Understand what makes these Zorglaxians tick." The bridge fell silent, the suggestion hanging in the air like a bad smell no one wanted to claim. Vyerk scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Sure, why not? I've always wanted to know what nightmares look like up close." Kess nodded, his greenhorn enthusiasm undiminished. "We could learn their weaknesses. Maybe even find a way to disrupt their waves. Or we could all end up drooling vegetables," Jorvin muttered. "But hey, what's life without a bit of risk, right?" "Exactly," Vyerk agreed, relishing the absurdity of their situation. "If we're going down, we might as well go down swinging, or hallucinating. Whichever comes first." With the decision made, the crew spurred into action, rigging up makeshift interfaces and cobbled together devices. It was the kind of engineering that would make health and safety inspectors sob in their sleep. "Ready when you are, Captain," Sierra said, fingers poised over the console like a concert pianist about to play a dirge. Vyerk glanced around at his crew. "Remember, folks, this isn't just about survival. It's about making sure the Zorglaxians remember us. Even if it's just as the crazy humans who gate-crashed their sanctum." The crew nodded, a sense of grim determination binding them together. They weren't just fighting for their lives, but for their right to exist in a universe that seemed hell-bent on writing them off. "All right then," Vyerk said, feeling a rush of adrenaline mixed with a twinge of insanity. "Let's see what these aliens have got. Activate the Dreamscape interface." Sierra's fingers danced over the controls, and the ship shuddered as it connected with the Dreamscape, reality bending like a funhouse mirror. "Well, here we go," Jorvin muttered, bracing himself as the ship plunged into the bizarre realm of the Zorglaxians. The Dreamscape enveloped them, a chaotic swirl of colors and shapes that defied description. It was a place where logic took a long lunch and left insanity in charge. The ship drifted through impossible landscapes, where gravity was optional and physics was a concept best left at the door. "Reminds me of that time I had too much to drink," Ree remarked, clinging to her console for support. "Except worse, because this hangover could kill us." The crew's vision shifted, the Dreamscape responding to their collective consciousness. It was like playing a video game where the cheat codes were written in gibberish. Let's see if we can find something useful, Vyark said, focusing his thoughts on understanding the alien perspective. Maybe they've got a user manual lying around. The ship navigated through the surreal maze, each crew member focusing their intentions on unraveling the mystery behind the Zorglaxian attacks. It was a mental tug-of-war, though it felt more like playing chess against an opponent who occasionally flipped the board. Kess, eyes wide with concentration, spoke up. I think I'm starting to see patterns. Like pathways or conduits of energy they're using. Sierra nodded, her expression taut with concentration. If we can map these pathways, we might disrupt their control over the Dreamscape. Captain, I'm picking up something, Jorvin announced, his voice tinged with surprise. It's like emotion, anger, fear, frustration. The Zorglaxians are scared of us. Vyark asked, incredulous. Not exactly, Jorvin replied. Scared of losing control. We've pushed them further than they're comfortable with. The revelation was a lifeline, a thread of hope in the midst of chaos. If the Zorglaxians could be unnerved, then maybe they could be defeated. Focus on amplifying that fear, Vyark instructed, a plan forming in his mind. Let's give them something to really worry about. The crew pooled their mental resources, projecting a sense of chaos and unpredictability into the Dreamscape. They were no longer just observers. They were active participants in the Zorglaxians' nightmare. The Dreamscape shifted as the Zorglaxians struggled to regain control, their attacks faltering. The energy waves grew erratic, no longer the coordinated onslaught they had been. It's working, Kess said, his voice filled with awe. We're destabilizing their control, keep it up, Vyark urged, feeling the thrill of victory within reach. We need to push harder. As the crew pressed their advantage, Vyark couldn't help but smile. They were fighting a battle of wits and winning. It was a testament to human ingenuity and sheer stubbornness, a reminder that even in the darkest moments there was always a way forward. We're almost there, Rhys said, her focus unwavering. Just a little more. With a final mental push, the crew shattered the Zorglaxians' hold over the Dreamscape, sending the aliens reeling. Their energy waves sputtered and died, leaving the last hope free to maneuver. The ship surged forward, breaking free of the Dreamscape's grasp. The crew sighed in collective relief as the chaos receded, leaving them drifting in the quiet emptiness of space once more. Well, that was a trip, Jorvin said, shaking his head as if to clear the lingering effects of their ordeal. Remind me to never do that again, Rhys added, though her smile suggested she was proud of their achievement. Vyark leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of their success. They'd faced the impossible and come out on top, proving that even in the most surreal circumstances, humanity's greatest weapon was its ability to adapt. Captain, Sierra said, breaking the silence, we've got a clear path ahead. No sign of the Zorglaxians regrouping. Good, Vyark replied, a note of satisfaction in his voice. Then let's get the hell out of here before they change their minds. With the course set and the ship steady, the crew settled into their routines, the tension of their recent battle giving way to a sense of camaraderie and accomplishment. They'd stared into the abyss and laughed, proving that when it came to surviving the universe's madness, there was no team better suited than them. As the last hope sailed through the stars, each crew member took a moment to reflect on their journey. They were a ragtag bunch, but they were survivors, and they'd proven that even in the darkest corners of the universe, human ingenuity and a touch of madness were more than enough to tip the scales. Vyark watched his crew with pride, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. In a universe where reality was often stranger than fiction, they'd learned to adapt, to improvise, and most importantly, to never underestimate the power of a well-timed joke. Another day, another crisis narrowly avoided, Vyark said, more to himself than anyone else. Just another day at the office, Sierra echoed, her voice laced with humor. And with that, the last hope continued its journey through the cosmos, ready for the next adventure, the next challenge, and the next opportunity to prove that when it came to surviving the universe's madness, there was no team better suited than them. The last hope barreled through the dreamscape, a cosmic drunkard staggering home after last call. The ship shook and groaned like an old man trying to dance. Everyone was focused, which meant everyone was pretending not to be utterly terrified. "All right, team," Vyerk announced, voice steady despite the chaos. "We're making headway, but let's not get cocky. Remember what happened to Manny?" Kess, channeling all his newbie eagerness, looked up from his console. What did happen to Manny? He decided to test fate, and fate hit back with a brick, Jorvin replied, his fingers dancing over his console like a pianist trying to keep a tune while the piano was on fire. "Exactly, so keep your helmets on, chew your gum, or whatever it is that helps you focus," Vyerk added, casting a glance around the bridge. Because just when you think the universe can't get any worse, it finds another way to kick you in the teeth. No sooner had the captain spoken than the ship lurched violently. The Zorglaxians were back, and they were not in a forgiving mood. The dreamscape twisted, colors bleeding together like a watercolor left out in the rain. "Ah, our friendly neighborhood Zorglaxians," Ree said dryly, eyes locked on her screen. "Never miss a chance to remind us we're unwelcome guests. It's like they're trying to evict us with a sledgehammer," Sierra added, her fingers flying over the controls in a desperate attempt to stabilize their trajectory. Vyerk gripped the armrests of his chair, steadying himself as the ship bucked and shimmied. "Jorvin, any chance you can sweet-talk our way out of this?" Jorvin shot him a look that suggested he'd sooner hug a Zorglaxian. "Sure, Captain. I'll just ask them nicely to stop obliterating us." "Worth a shot," Vyerk quipped, though he knew the situation was more dire than he let on. The dreamscape was a hostile place, and the Zorglaxians were its ruthless landlords. Energy waves, more chaotic and aggressive than before, battered the last hope, rocking it like a dinghy in a storm. "Brace yourselves," Sierra shouted, her voice cutting through the din. The ship took another hit, this one more brutal than the last. The lights flickered, and for a heart-stopping moment, darkness threatened to swallow them whole. Vyerk cursed under his breath, feeling the mission slipping through his fingers like sand. "We're losing power," Ree warned, her voice tight with concern. "Tell me something I don't know," Vyerk replied, though he was already mentally cataloging potential solutions. Not that there were many. Like the fact that we're being boarded. Kess piped up, his voice tinged with both fear and a strange, reckless excitement. The crew exchanged apprehensive glances. Being boarded was the last thing they'd prepared for, which was saying something since they weren't exactly rolling in preparation. "Lock down the corridors," Vyerk ordered, his mind racing. "And for the love of whatever deity is laughing at us right now, arm yourselves." As the crew scrambled to follow his orders, Vyerk felt the weight of their predicament settle heavily on his shoulders. The dreamscape was bad enough without Zorglaxians adding insult to injury. The first sign of the invaders came with the hiss of airlock seals breaking. Then, the clang of boots on metal, a discordant rhythm that set everyone's nerves on edge. "Here they come," Jorvin muttered, checking the charge on his blaster. "Hope they like getting shot. Remind them it's customary to announce themselves before entering," Ree suggested, her voice drier than the Martian desert. The Zorglaxians burst into view, grotesque and sneering, their contempt for humanity etched into their features. They moved with an eerie fluidity as if they'd stepped straight out of someone's worst fever dream. "Hey, Zorglaxians," Vyerk called out, raising his weapon. "Welcome to the last hope. We're a bit short on hospitality, so you'll have to make do with bullets." Blaster fire erupted, a cacophony of light and sound that filled the cramped corridors. The Zorglaxians returned fire with weapons that seemed to warp reality itself, bending the dreamscape around them in unsettling ways. "Hold the line," Vyerk shouted, firing shot after shot. His crew, despite their fear, held firm. Each of them knew the stakes, and none were willing to let their ship fall without a fight. The battle was brutal, a chaotic dance of survival where every move might be their last. The Zorglaxians were relentless, their numbers overwhelming. For every alien they felled, another seemed to take its place, snarling and snapping like a beast. "We can't keep this up," Jorvin grunted, knocking a Zorglaxian aside with the butt of his gun. "There's too many of them, keep fighting," Vyark urged, refusing to give in to despair. "We're not dead yet," but even as he spoke he could feel the truth in Jorvin's words. They were outnumbered and outgunned, their chances dwindling with every shot fired. The dreamscape twisted around them, a malevolent presence eager to swallow them whole. Kess, eyes wide with panic, suddenly called out. "Captain, I've found something." Vyark spared him a glance, ducking behind a bulkhead to avoid a blast. "Now's not the time for discoveries, Kess." "No, listen." Kess insisted, his voice rising. "There's a pattern in the dreamscape. I think it's a way to communicate." Vyark's heart skipped a beat. In the chaos of battle, the prospect of communication felt like a lifeline. "You better be right," he warned, "or we're all gonna look real dumb when we're dead." Trusting his instincts and a rookie's intuition, Vyark barked new orders. "Jorvin, cover Kess. Ree, see if you can make sense of this pattern of his." "I'll try," Ree replied, her usual sarcasm tempered by a glimmer of hope. As the battle raged around them, Kess and Ree focused on the pattern unfolding in the dreamscape. It was like trying to decipher a code written by a madman, complex, shifting, yet strangely familiar. "If we can match our signals to theirs, we might be able to talk," Kess explained, his voice tinged with excitement and desperation. Ree nodded, her fingers flying over her console. "Or we could fry our brains trying. But I suppose it's better than dying the old-fashioned way." With painstaking care, they adjusted frequencies, aligning their transmission with the dreamscape's bizarre rhythms. It was a shot in the dark, a last-ditch effort that bordered on madness. As the final adjustments were made, Vyark felt a strange calm wash over him. "All right, let's see if the universe is feeling generous today." Kess activated the signal, and for a moment nothing happened. The battle continued unabated, a grim reminder of their precarious position. But then slowly the Zorglaxians faltered, their attacks becoming erratic and disjointed. "It's working," Ree said, disbelief etched into her voice. "Keep the signal steady," Vyark instructed, daring to hope. "We might just have a chance." The Zorglaxians hesitated, confusion evident in their movements. It was like they were listening to a voice they couldn't quite comprehend, a voice that cut through the chaos, demanding to be heard. "Now's our chance," Vyark said, raising his voice to a shout. "We're not just fighting for survival. We're showing them how stubborn humanity can be." As the crew continued to hold the line, Kess and Ree refined the signal, honing in on the elusive pattern. It was a delicate balance, a tightrope walk between communication and annihilation. The Zorglaxians, faced with this unexpected development, began to pull back. Their retreat was tentative, as though uncertain of the newfound threat posed by the humans. Captain Sierra called out, "They're withdrawing. We've thrown them off balance." Vyark allowed himself a small, weary smile. "Looks like we're not done yet." In the wake of the Zorglaxian retreat, a tense silence settled over the ship. The crew, battered and exhausted, exchanged glances that spoke volumes. They'd survived, barely, but the cost was high and the threat far from eliminated. "Good work, everyone," Vyark said, his voice carrying a gravity that belied his usual humor. "We've bought ourselves some time, but we need to stay sharp." The Zorglaxians aren't going to give up easily. As the crew regrouped and tended to the wounded, Vyark pondered their next move. They were teetering on the edge of an abyss, but they'd also discovered something extraordinary, a way to communicate across the impossible distances of the dreamscape. "We might just have a fighting chance," Jorvin said, his voice rough with fatigue. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Ree cautioned, though her expression was tinged with subdued optimism. "This is just one battle. There's a war ahead." Vyark nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. The universe was still out to get them, but for the first time they had a weapon that could turn the tide. A weapon crafted from human ingenuity, desperation, and the indomitable will to survive. "Kess, you might have just saved our skins," Vyark said, clapping the younger man on the shoulder. Kess grinned, a mixture of relief and pride on his face. "I'm just glad it worked. I wasn't sure it would." None of us were, Vyerk replied, his tone laced with wry amusement. But in this line of work, certainty's a luxury we can't afford. As the last hope drifted through the battered remnants of the Dreamscape, Vyerk knew their journey was far from over. The Zorglaxians would regroup, and the Dreamscape held more challenges yet to be faced. But for now, they'd earned a brief respite, a moment to breathe, regroup, and prepare for whatever horrors awaited them in the cold, uncaring void of space. The last hope creaked and groaned like an old warhorse as it settled into the temporary respite. Captain Vyerk leaned against the main console, eyes scanning the chaotic dreamscape beyond the viewport. It was a mess out there, all swirling colors and twisted realities, as if God got bored halfway through painting the universe and tossed the whole palette onto the canvas. "Feels like we just survived a meat grinder," Jorvin grumbled, nursing a new bruise on his arm. "One of those fancy ones that slices, dices, and screws with your sense of reality." "Yeah, but at least we're not dead," Sierra pointed out, though the enthusiasm was absent from her voice. It was the kind of optimism you'd expect from someone finding out their house wasn't entirely burned down, just mostly. Vyerk glanced over at Kess, who was still riding the high of their narrow victory. The kid had stumbled onto something big, like tripping over a gold bar in a minefield. "Good work, Kess. You might have a knack for not dying," Vyerk drawled, his tone somewhere between genuine praise and the weary sarcasm of a man too familiar with impending doom. Kess just nodded, his grin a mix of relief and disbelief. "I just figured." "Well, if reality's this nuts out here, maybe there's a method to the madness." "A method to the madness," re-echoed, her voice dry as a Martian summer. "Let's hope the universe isn't just setting us up for a bigger joke." Vyerk straightened and clapped his hands together, businesslike. "All right, team. We've got a breathing window, but it's not gonna last forever. We need to figure out how to exploit this pattern Kess found. It's our best shot at talking some sense into those Zorglaxian bastards." "Assuming they have any sense to talk into," Jorvin muttered, fiddling with his blaster. "I'm not convinced they aren't just angry space squids with a superiority complex." "Speaking of complex, their weapons are something else," Sierra added, half in awe, half in frustration. "If we could just tap into that energy, we could get out of this dreamscape before it folds us like a cheap suit." Vyerk sighed, the weight of command settling back on his shoulders. "Siphoning energy from their weapons is risky as hell, Sierra. We're talking might end up as intergalactic toast levels of risky." "Better than the alternative," Ree cut in, her gaze fixed on her screens as if daring them to betray her with bad news. "Which is, dying horribly." "Always a fan of the least horrible option," Vyerk agreed. "Let's focus on this pattern. If we can decode it, we might be able to send a message that'll get through to them. Something more eloquent than 'please don't kill us.' Something like 'we accidentally crashed your dreamscape party. Sorry about the mess,'" Jorvin suggested, sarcasm dripping from every word. "Exactly," Vyerk said with a straight face. "Only, diplomatic." And with fewer death threats, Ree and Kess dove back into the task, eyes darting across the consoles as they worked to fine-tune the signal. The room was a cacophony of beeps and whirs, like a symphony conducted by a madman who'd misplaced his sheet music. While they worked, Vyerk wandered over to Sierra and Jorvin. "Keep an eye on the power levels. Last thing we need is for the lights to go out while we're mid-negotiation." "You got it, Captain," Sierra said, pulling up the power distribution chart. "We're running on fumes here, but I'll see what power I can divert without frying the circuits. Just don't blow us up, all right?" Jorvin quipped, though there was an undercurrent of seriousness beneath the humor. They all wanted to live long enough to see human space outside the dreamscape once more. Iors ticked by like molasses in zero gravity. The crew moved with a quiet efficiency, the weight of their situation pressing down like a physical force. The corridors of the Last Hope were littered with signs of their recent battle, scorch marks, discarded equipment, and the occasional dent in the walls from where Zorglaxian bodies had collided. The ship was a battered veteran, much like her crew, but still stubbornly clinging to life. "All right," Ree finally said, breaking the silence with a note of triumph. "I think we've got something." "Let's hear it," Vyark said, leaning in with the rest of the crew. "We've managed to sync our transmission with the Dreamscape's fluctuating patterns," Kess explained, his voice a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "It's like tuning a radio to the world's weirdest frequency, and we think it'll get through to them." Vyark asked, arching an eyebrow. Ree shrugged. "It's a gamble, but it's the best we've got. If nothing else, it'll tell them we're more than just cannon fodder." "Well then," Vyark said, straightening up, "let's roll the dice." The crew gathered around as Kess initiated the transmission, a signal beaming out into the swirling chaos of the dreamscape. It was a shot in the dark, a message in a bottle tossed into a cosmic sea of madness. For a long moment, nothing happened. The ship hummed with the low thrum of engines, the pulse of a living entity hanging on by a thread. Then slowly the dreamscape around them began to change. The roiling chaos eased, the colors and patterns shifting in ways that were almost receptive. "Looks like we've got their attention," Ree murmured, eyes wide with surprise. "Let's hope they're not too pissed off to listen," Vyark replied, though a note of hope crept into his voice. The ship trembled as a new wave of energy washed over them, but this time it lacked the malevolent edge of before. It was like being doused with a bucket of cold water instead of acid, still startling but significantly less deadly. "All right, Zorglaxians," Vyark muttered under his breath, "let's see if you're in the mood for a chat." The console blinked, and a holographic display flickered to life. A distorted image of a Zorglaxian commander appeared, its features more alien and disdainful than ever. Even as a hologram, its contempt for humanity was palpable. "Well, at least they picked up the phone," Jorvin said, arms crossed as he leaned back against the wall. Vyark stepped forward, adopting the air of a man accustomed to talking his way out of trouble, and into it sometimes. "Greetings from the last hope. We didn't come here by choice, but we're hoping to leave that way. Any chance you'd consider a truce long enough for us to explain ourselves?" The Zorglaxian commander's image crackled, its voice a series of guttural clicks and hisses that translated into something approximating human speech. "You trespass in our sacred dreamscape, humans. Explain why we should not obliterate you for your insolence." "Ah, the classic shoot first, ask questions later approach," Vyark said, nodding like he was taking notes. "Look, we stumbled in here by accident. Our ship was damaged, and we were looking for a way to survive. We didn't know we were crashing your cosmic dinner party." The holographic alien regarded him with a skepticism that could have etched steel. "You are intruders. We're also the ones who figured out how to talk to you," Vyark pointed out, gesturing to Kess and Ree. "We didn't come here to fight. We came here because we had no other choice." There was a pause as the Zorglaxian considered this. The ship was silent, the crew holding their breaths as they awaited the verdict. "You have shown resourcefulness," the Zorglaxian finally admitted, the words grudging and stiff. "Perhaps a discussion is warranted." "Resourcefulness," Jorvin whispered to Sierra, "that's one way to put desperate and not dead yet progress," Sierra replied with a grin. "We'll take it." Vyark, meanwhile, kept his focus on the Zorglaxian. "We'd be more than happy to discuss terms. Our goal is just to get the hell out of here and back to our corner of the galaxy. Negotiations will be considered," the Zorglaxian said, its image flickering slightly as if the dreamscape itself was listening in. "But heed this. You remain under scrutiny. Any further aggression will result in your immediate destruction." "Duly noted," Vyark said with a wry smile. "We'll be the model of restraint, I promise." The hologram blinked out, leaving a lingering silence in its wake. The crew exchanged glances, the weight of what had just transpired settling in like a gentle snowfall, unexpected and almost too good to be true. "Well," Ree said, breaking the quiet, "looks like we've got ourselves a seat at the negotiations table. If we're lucky, they'll keep the table and not throw us under it," Jorvin added, ever the realist. Vyark allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. They'd managed to buy themselves some time. a chance to maneuver, to strategize, to find a way out of the labyrinth they'd stumbled into. It wasn't a victory, not by a long shot, but it was a start. "All right, team," he said, clapping his hands together again. "Let's get ready for a diplomatic dance with our new Zorglaxian pals. Remember, we're not just fighting for survival, we're proving we belong in this universe, stubbornness and all." The crew nodded, a new resolve settling over them. The universe might still have it out for them, but for the first time they had an edge, a way to turn the tide in their favor. As the last hope drifted through the still volatile dreamscape, Vyark knew the road ahead was fraught with danger. But they'd come this far, and hell if they were going to back down now. "Let's show them what humans are made of," he said, a fierce determination in his voice. And with that, the crew of the Last Hope set their sights on the uncertain future, ready to face whatever lay ahead with the same irreverent defiance that had brought them this far. The Last Hope floated through the dreamscape like a drunk stumbling into a church service. Everyone noticed, and no one was thrilled about it. The crew, however, were less concerned with divine judgment and more focused on not getting vaporized by alien energy waves. Vyark sat in the command chair, trying not to look like he was sweating bullets. The Zorglaxians had given them a sliver of hope, and this was their chance to widen it into a doorway. Or, at the very least, not get it slammed shut in their faces. "All right, people," Vyark called, clapping his hands together like a coach trying to rally a losing team. "We need something they'll respect. A demonstration of our culture that says, hey, we're not just here to kill time until we evolve into something useful." Jorvin, the perpetual cynic, leaned back in his seat, arms crossed. "How about a nice game of darts with Zorglaxian heads as the targets?" "I hear aliens love a good sport." "Tempting," Vyark replied dryly, "but I was thinking something more." Ceremonial Sierra perked up, twirling a stray wire between her fingers like a cat with yarn. "What about a space funeral? I mean, if they don't take it as a declaration of war." The idea hung in the air, its weight pressing down on them. Vyark considered it. The Zorglaxians had misunderstood their intentions initially, but maybe showing them that a funeral was about honoring life, not declaring war, could bridge the gap. "Perfect," Vyark said, voice steady. "We show them the respect we give our dead. Maybe they'll get off our backs about the whole declaration of war misunderstanding." Ree raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on her lips. "So we're betting our lives on the fact that they'll appreciate fine funerary rituals. What could possibly go wrong?" "Only everything," Jorvin muttered, earning a chuckle from the crew. "Let's not overthink this," Vyark said, which was code for "we have no better plan." "Kes, patch into the Zorglaxian communication frequency. Let's see if they're open to a cultural exchange." Kes nodded, his fingers dancing over the console like a pianist performing a particularly tricky sonata. The speakers crackled to life with a familiar series of clicks and hisses, the alien language translating into something they could understand, barely. "This is the Zorglaxian commander," the voice droned, sounding as enthusiastic as a tax auditor on a Monday. "Why do you contact us, humans?" Vyark stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Greetings again. We wish to demonstrate an important human ceremony to convey our respect for life, and perhaps prove we're not the barbarians you take us for." The line was silent, the kind of silence that's usually followed by a swift kick to the teeth. Vyark held his breath. "Proceed," the Zorglaxian finally responded, the word heavy with reluctance. "Great," Vyark said, exhaling. "Jorvin, Sierra, prepare for the ceremony. Ree, get the visuals ready to broadcast. Let's show them what we're made of. Hopefully not just blood and guts," Jorvin quipped as he moved to follow Sierra to the observation bay. "Think positive," Sierra shot back. "Or at least don't think about dying horribly." As the crew prepared the body of their fallen comrade Manny for the ceremony, Vyark couldn't help but reflect on the bizarre situation. Here they were, in the middle of hostile alien space, trying to impress their would-be executioners with a eulogy. It was almost funny in a "this is how I die" sort of way. The ceremony began, a simple projection of what remained of humanity's time-honored traditions. Returned to Vyark, murmuring, "Let's hope Manny doesn't mind being the poster boy for intergalactic diplomacy." Vyark chuckled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Manny never minded much. He was usually too busy causing trouble. The body, wrapped in a silvery shroud that shimmered like a forgotten dream, was placed at the center of the observation bay. The crew stood solemnly, a stark contrast to the chaos outside the ship's hull. Vyark took a deep breath and began speaking, his voice carrying over the silent bay like a whisper of an old hymn. "Today we honor one of our own who fought bravely and lived fully. We send him to the stars, not as a warrior, but as a testament to what it means to be human." The Zorglaxians watched through their technology, the holographic image of their commander flickering at the edge of the broadcast. Vyark continued, words chosen carefully like a man defusing a bomb. "We respect life, even in death. It is not our desire to bring war into your sacred space, but to survive, to persevere." As the eulogy wound down, the crew stepped back, allowing the body to be released into space. It drifted away, a silent, dignified farewell to a fellow human, and hopefully not the beginning of a Zorglaxian firing squad. The Zorglaxian image flickered, the commander's eyes narrowing as it spoke. "You mourn your dead in this manner?" "Yes," Vyark replied, meeting the alien's gaze. "We honor them, cherish their memory. It's one of the few things that keeps us sane in a universe that's anything but." The alien's gaze didn't soften, but there was a shift, a slight alteration in the way it regarded the human crew. "This is unusual, but intriguing." Vyark seized the opportunity, his voice earnest. "We'd like to extend a hand of cooperation. We don't belong here, but maybe together we can learn from each other, avoid unnecessary bloodshed." There was a pause, the alien commander considering the offer with the weight of 1,000 unseen calculations. The crew of the Last Hope waited, the air thick with the tension of potential annihilation. Finally, the commander spoke again, its tone less hostile, though no less curt. "Your proposal is acceptable. We will cease hostilities and consider your offer of cooperation." Jorvin let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Well, slap my face and call me an optimist. They didn't shoot us." Yet re-interjected, her grin a mix of relief and disbelief. Sierra nodded, exhaling slowly. "We're alive, and that's a start." Vyark, however, remained focused, his mind already turning to the next steps. They'd managed to buy themselves time, a reprieve from the brink of destruction. But the path ahead was still fraught with peril. "All right, team," Vyark said, his voice carrying a note of cautious optimism. "We've got a lot of work to do. Let's focus on establishing that cooperation. Maybe we can make sure our next encounter with the Zorglaxians doesn't involve so much dodging and weaving. Here's to hoping they don't change their minds," re-added, raising an imaginary glass. The crew dispersed, each returning to their duties with renewed purpose. Kess remained by Vyark's side, watching as the Zorglaxian communication channel closed. "You think this will work, Captain?" Vyark shrugged, the weight of command never far from his thoughts. "I think it might. But if it doesn't, we'll just have to convince them the hard way that humans aren't so easy to get rid of." Kess chuckled, shaking his head. "We're a stubborn lot, aren't we?" "Damn right we are," Vyark replied with a wry smile. "And that's what makes us human." As the Last Hope glided through the Dreamscape, the crew went about their tasks with a renewed sense of purpose. The threat of annihilation was still there, lurking like a shadow, but for the first time in too long they had a chance to breathe. A chance to prove that humanity could survive the universe's cruelest whims. "Let's get to work," Vyark said, his voice steady, a beacon in the chaos. "We've got a universe to navigate, and it's not going to wait for us." And with that, the crew of the Last Hope set to their tasks, ready to face whatever the universe decided to throw at them next, with the same irreverent defiance that had brought them this far. The Last Hope was doing its best to not collapse on itself, but like everything else in the universe, it had a knack for bad timing. The ship had been through hell and back, and judging by the ominous creaking from the hull, It was ready for another round trip. Vyark stood on the bridge, surveying the aftermath of the Dreamscape battle with all the enthusiasm of a condemned man checking his parole status. "Well, what's left of us is still floating," Jorvin said, leaning against a console that had seen better days. "So that's something. Always looking on the bright side, aren't you, Jorvin?" Vyark replied, his voice dry as a desert planet. "Can't wait to hear your eulogy if I ever keel over. Won't have to wait long at this rate," Jorvin shot back with a smirk. Sierra joined them, wiping her hands on a rag that might have been clean in a past life. "Hull integrity's holding. By a thread." "But it's holding," she said, injecting a trace of optimism into the gloom. "Good enough," Vyark said. "We've got a bit of breathing space and we're going to use it." Ree plopped down into her chair. "You mean we're not going to use it to panic and scream?" "That'll be step 2, Vyark quipped, though panic was already a default setting for most of them. Kes, the youngest among them, was busy sifting through the remnants of the Zorglaxian data stream. "There's something here," he said, his eyes scanning lines of alien text. "Patterns like the ones I used to communicate. Could be useful. Useful how?" Ree asked, skepticism practically dripping from her words. "Like not getting us blown up next time," Kes replied, with the innocent enthusiasm of someone who hadn't been shot at enough times to recognize a lost cause. "Seems like a good plan," Vyark said, patting Kes on the shoulder. "See what you can dig up. Anything that keeps us from becoming space dust is a win in my book." The crew set to work, each falling into their roles with the kind of grim determination that comes from too many close brushes with death. Around them, the last hope groaned and complained, but it kept on flying, a testament to human engineering, or at least stubbornness. As the Iors dragged on, a strange calm descended over the ship. The sort that felt like the universe was planning something particularly nasty, just to keep them on their toes. But for now, they were alive, and that was a start. Vyark found himself wandering the corridors, each step echoing through the metal bones of the ship. He was searching for something he couldn't quite name, perhaps a sense of peace, or maybe just a good place to hide if things went south again. He stopped at an observation window, staring out at the distorted infinity of the Dreamscape. It was a beautiful kind of madness, the kind that seemed to promise both wonder and horror in equal measure. He wondered how long it would be before the next round of chaos found them. "Captain," Ree's voice came over the intercom, jerking him from his thoughts. "You might want to see this." Vyark made his way back to the bridge. "What have we got?" Ree was standing by the console, a grin playing on her lips. Kes found something interesting in the Zorglaxian data. Kes was practically bouncing on his feet, excitement lighting up his eyes. "It's a code, Captain, more like a language. I think I can use it to open a dialogue, an actual dialogue with the Zorglaxians." "Wait, you mean we've been talking to them wrong this whole time?" Jorvin asked, arching an eyebrow. "Not wrong, just less right." Kes answered, his enthusiasm unperturbed. "Less wrong is as good as we get around here," Vyark said, nodding for Kes to continue. "Go ahead, open that dialogue. Let's see what happens." Kes tapped away at the console, the screen filling with cryptic symbols and characters. After a few moments, the Zorglaxian commander's hologram flickered into view, the alien's expression as unreadable as ever. "This is Commander Zorglax of the sacred Dreamscape," the commander announced, its tone as welcoming as a debt collector's visit. "You have re-established communication." "Yes," Vyark began, choosing his words with the care of someone defusing a bomb. "We seek understanding and collaboration as we did before. We share this space now, and it's better to do so as allies than adversaries." The Zorglaxian commander paused, its eyes narrowing slightly. "This space is yours, but we acknowledge your survival. It intrigues us. Survival is one of our specialties," Vyark replied, ignoring the bead of sweat trickling down his neck. "We offer cooperation, exchange. Learning you offer much," the commander observed, its gaze fixed and unblinking. "But what do you seek? Understanding, peace, and maybe a way to stop you from shooting at us again." The Zorglaxian's eyes flickered, possibly the alien equivalent of a chuckle. "Your offer is acceptable. We will consider it." With that, the hologram blinked out, leaving the crew in a silence so profound it was almost a noise in itself. "Well," Jorvin said, breaking the tension with his usual nonchalance, "that was either the smartest thing we've ever done or the start of a whole new mess." "I guess we'll find out," Vyark said, rubbing his temples. "For now, we focus on repairs and making sure we don't accidentally insult our new friends." "Sounds like a plan," Sierra said, stretching. "Let's get to it." The crew dispersed once more, each to their tasks, with the weight of the universe still heavy on their shoulders but their steps lighter for the moment. Vyark lingered on the bridge, staring out into the swirling chaos of the dreamscape. He thought about the power of perception, how the same act could be seen as a threat or a gesture of peace, depending on who was looking and why. "We're not out of the woods yet," he muttered to himself, though there were no trees in space. Only stars and the infinite void. But if they could navigate the dreamscape, survive alien misunderstandings and the ever-present threat of annihilation, maybe they could find a way to coexist. Maybe they could find peace, however tenuous, amidst the stars. For the first time in a long while, Vyark allowed himself a moment of hope. Not the kind that promised a happy ending, but the kind that promised another day, another chance to fight, to survive. "All right," he said, calling the crew back to the bridge. "Let's see what we can do about not getting killed today." The crew gathered, their faces a mix of anticipation and weary resolve. They'd been through hell together, but they were still standing, and they'd keep standing as long as they could. "Let's get to work," Vyark said, a grim smile playing on his lips. "There's a universe out there, and we're going to navigate it, one way or another." As the last hope drifted through the dreamscape, the crew set about their tasks, ready to face whatever the cosmos decided to throw at them next. They were human, after all, and if there was one thing humans were good at, it was surviving against the odds. And so, amidst the chaos of the universe, the last hope sailed on, an island of defiance in a sea of uncertainty. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew they'd face it together with the same irreverent courage that had brought them this far. Because in the end, that was what it meant to be human, to fight, to survive, to hope. "Let's get to it," Jorvin said, clapping Vyark on the back. "After all, there's a whole universe out there just waiting to make our lives more interesting." Vyark chuckled, nodding in agreement. "Damn right there is. And we'll be ready for it, whatever comes next." And with that, the crew of the Last Hope turned their eyes to the stars, ready to chart a course through the unknown, guided by the faint light of hope and the unyielding spirit of humanity.